My goal is to make stuff as practical and as personable as possible in a short period of time. We're going to talk about writing, one of my all-time favorite subjects. If I had to make a list of like my top 5 presentations, the ones I get the most excited about, I think this would be on that list. Now, personal bias aside, because I am a writer, I've found, and what I've learned over the years about the power of writing, some of which I'm sure you already know, will blow you away what writing does. And we're going to approach the concept of writing from a very distinct perspective. It's near and dear to my heart because I am a writer, but I also have learned over the years what writing can really do for our kids. So I'm excited to share some of those things with you, share some strategies. So let's jump right in. Some of you I know like to see some sort of an agenda. Here it is, as basic as it is. We're going to talk about writing for learning as opposed to writing or learning to write. Writing for the purpose of learning versus writing for the purpose of learning how to write. There's a difference, in other words. See, I can use the concept of writing, or I can use writing strategies to help me learn a concept or to deepen my understanding, or I can learn to write. And we'll separate what the two differences are and what they really mean and which one probably gets us the biggest bang for our buck. And of course, as always, we'll jump in and talk lots of strategies, and we'll do a Q&A at the end as well. It's audience participation time. No need to use the chat feature this time around because it's not so much a true and false, it's more of an agree disagree. Take a look at the 4 statements you see on the screen. Which ones do you agree with? Which ones do you kind of agree with, partially agree with? What do you think? Lean in, take a look, and then I'll highlight some things for you. So let's jump in. Number 1, writing supports the development of all sorts of really good things, including higher order thinking and analysis, conceptual thinking. You should probably agree with number 1. There's lots of evidence that says the same exact thing. When we write for the purpose of understanding, when we use writing, the process of writing to support learning rather than the process of learning how to write, because as I mentioned, there's a difference between writing for learning and writing to learn, and writing as a process of just learning how to be a better writer. We'll tear all of those apart and we'll dig into it and give you some good definitions as well. Number 2, relevant strategies, relevant topics tend to engage. Number 2, I would say I would agree with that one as well. I noticed number 3, that's like a super old citation. I need to update it, but I haven't seen any data that contradicts, any recent data anyway, that contradicts the truth of that statement. There's an achievement gap in literacy between males and females. We already know that. And it's larger in writing than it is in reading, which is pretty interesting. And number 4, I don't know about you, but when I was a classroom teacher, because I was a language arts and social studies teacher, we did a lot of writing. My students tended to grumble. I was a middle school teacher. You can say, okay, Bryan, middle school kids grumble about everything, don't they? Or they grumble about a lot. It wasn't so much that, but I found myself being a little frustrated because I never, as a student, disliked writing. I mean, I didn't wake up in the morning and think, oh boy, I'm going to go to the library this weekend and write a research paper just for fun. But a lot of kids, I don't know if that's your experience as well, they just kind of, oh, we have to write. If think of that scene from the movie The Christmas Story, if you watch that over the holidays, where the teacher says we get to write a theme. That's what they called a research paper back in the 1950s, and all the kids grumble and they complain. A lot of our students struggle when it comes to writing. Why is that? It's because, this is my opinion, just Bryan's opinion speaking at this point, a lot of our kids tend to grumble when it comes to writing because we've made writing this formal, heavy, evaluative thing, like writing a research paper. Nobody wakes up on a Sunday morning and thinks, just for fun, I'm going to write a 5-paragraph essay. But some of you might wake up in the morning and decide to write to journal or write to help figure out or solve a problem. In classrooms, because especially when we do the high stakes stuff, the grades where we have to do standardized testing and get kids to pass achievement tests, we've made writing this very serious, very heavy, very grade-oriented thing. What I'll present to you is a way to think about writing rather than writing to express my knowledge like I would in an essay or even a summary paragraph. Use writing to help develop knowledge rather than to help express knowledge. I'll dig into that and we'll talk about that as well. I think in previous sessions, I might have introduced you to Henry Rodiger. He is a brain guy, he's a neuroscientist, and he says this: whenever he does coursework, whenever he teaches coursework, they do at least two things, or he does at least two things with his kids, or with his students rather. He teaches graduate level coursework. They take a quiz like we just did, just to test knowledge and get a little bit of feedback, and they write. They write a lot. What do they write? They write to develop their understanding of something, not just writing to demonstrate understanding. That's the real key takeaway. In fact, if you're taking notes and you wanted to write down nothing other than this, when we use writing to help develop our understanding rather than to help demonstrate our understanding, the long-term impacts are amazing. Our memory improves, our engagement improves, our grades actually improve as well. And kids tend to grumble a lot less when we use the kind of writing I'll share with you here in just a moment. And here is that takeaway. There's two different ways to look at this writing thing: writing to learn, or writing in the service of learning, versus learning how to write. If you focus on the left-hand side of the screen first, when we write or use writing strategies in the classroom to support not the demonstration, but the development of understanding, when we use writing as a way to figure out what we know and what we think and what we understand, great things happen. It's opposed to learning how to write. I'm not suggesting that learning how to write is a bad thing. Regardless of the stage of your career, at this point in my career, I've written 6 books and a doctoral dissertation. I'm a pretty proficient writer, but you can always get better at sentence structure and writing and capitalization, usage, punctuation, spelling. That's what CUP stands for. You can always get better at that stuff. Regardless of how good you already are, you can always get better at the technical side of writing. But really, we're going to focus on writing in order to support the process of learning. And when we do that, because I've seen it happen just tons and tons of times with kids, it changes their thinking about writing. Rather than writing being this heavy formal thing where I'm getting graded on a rubric and I'm having to worry about, do I use a colon versus a semicolon? That stuff's important, but that's not the focus of this particular session. So briefly, let's do a quick 10,000-foot overview of this concept of writing in the service of learning rather than learning how to write, thinking like capitalization and sentence structure and punctuation, all that kind of stuff. So a couple of take-home messages we'll want to land with here is number one: there are really only 3 reasons we write. If you've never thought about it this way before, there are really only 3 reasons to write. Reason number one: to process something. You have something going on, and you do this in your own personal life. I know you do. You have to have a decision. You have to make a decision. So you sit down, you pick up a piece of paper, and you do a pro and con list. That's to process and figure something out. In fact, I tell students and I tell adults this all the time as well. The next time you're in a decision-making mode where you have a big decision in front of you and you don't know what to do, sit down and just start writing about it. It helps you. The process of writing is the process of thinking. The process of writing helps you figure out and solve problems. We also write in order to remember stuff. You can think at a really basic level. I have a grocery list that I need to remember, so I write down a bunch of stuff. I process something. I remember something just via a list. To-do lists are an easy way to think. And then ultimately, I can also write in order to communicate or say something via a blog or a newsletter or an email. Now, in classrooms, we focus a lot of time on the third one. We need our kids to communicate to us what they know, so we do a ticket out the door. I'm not dissing ticket out the door. It's a great strategy, but we use it so that kids can tell us what they understand or what they know. Or they write an essay, or they do a short fill in the blank or a short answer on a test. Those are where we're using writing in order for them to tell us what they know. The more we focus on processing, using writing to process, and a little bit to remember, the better off we are. That's key message number one. Key message or key landing idea number two is when we use a lot of writing to learn, writing in the service of learning, it provides a really good purpose. It gives us value, increases motivation. There's tons of evidence out there that says the same thing. I'm not going to kill you with evidence. I want to kill you with strategies. Bad choice of words. I don't want to kill anybody, but I want you to come away with lots of strategies. Key idea number three If you've never heard of Tony Wagner before, he's a Harvard guy, really interesting, does a lot of really interesting work in the field of 21st century skills. He's been in this doing this kind of work for 30 plus years. He came up with his list of what he calls essential 21st century skills. You can see what those are. Number 5 on his list is really we have to be effective written and oral communication. We have to be effective at that. And the more we get kids to write in order to help them understand what they learn, it actually helps them improve to be better formal writers. The more they write, even in an informal way, it actually improves their ability to do formal writing as well. Next key idea, number 4, good writing is not easy, even for those of us who consider ourselves pretty good at it. Take a look at the quote from this book. They say at the end of the quote, no wonder a lot of students tend to just freeze when just the thought of it, because it's a lot of heavy lifting, serious cognitive work. The process of writing is difficult. And one of the reasons, again, Brian's personal opinion here, I think our kids tend to struggle and grumble at it is because we've made it this overly formal thing. Not only is it difficult and challenging at times, we've attached grades to it and we've attached high stakes to it. The more we take those high stakes away and use writing strategies just to in the service of learning and understanding, it frees up the stress just a little bit for a lot of our kids. Key idea number 5, when we do lots of writing to learn, the brain kicks in and some amazing things happen when it comes to what happens in your brain. Writing to learn requires that we retrieve memories, which is a memory strategy. It forces us to elaborate and generate new ideas. All sorts of amazing things happen in my brain when I focus on a lot of writing to learn versus writing as expression, writing as learning in this point. Key idea number 6, we're doing the key ideas pretty quickly so we can spend most of our time jumping in and talking about strategies. Really good writing to learn or writing for learning, we can use those as synonyms at this point, it's pretty low stakes. What do I mean by that? Low stakes meaning we're not attaching a bunch of grades and points to it. If I need to attach any points at all to it, it will be a participation grade. I know the struggle that a lot of teachers have told me over the years is, Bryan, if I don't grade it or if I don't do points to it, they won't do it. And I get that struggle. That's partially we've developed that in kids. We've kind of developed this mentality that, well, if I don't get credit for it, why should I do it? I'm going to share with you some strategies that are easy to use that take the focus less away from do it so that you get your points and more focus on do this writing to help you understand what you know, what you don't know, what you learn, what you need to learn, next steps in order to broaden their perspective just a little bit. It's pretty low stakes. In other words, we're not attaching the writing to learn process or writing for learning to a lot of grades. When we do, we're not really focused on learning anymore. We're focused on solely on expression. Once again, expression, writing to express my understanding is not a bad thing. It's just not the focus of this particular session. Here's another way to look at it, low stakes writing versus high stakes writing. Let me pause for a moment, lean in, soak up this slide, and then I'll highlight something for you. And the key differences you see there, partially I've underlined them. We use a lot of low stakes writing to learn as a way to just figure out what we know, what we don't know, where we go next. Helps us to develop our understanding of something rather than to demonstrate our understanding. Again, I'm not saying high stakes writing is bad, but most of us don't choose in our own free time to do high stakes writing. They're pretty serious stuff. There's stuff attached to it. Grades, outcomes, decisions are attached to high stakes writing. There's a lot of pressure there. The more we in our classrooms focus on low stakes writing, we lower the pressure, lower the temperature just a little bit, and allow students to do a lot of writing in order to just figure out what they know and understand about something. Writing, in other words, as I said a couple of times already, writing in the service of learning. There's an asterisk next to not graded because I mentioned earlier, some teachers struggle with if I don't grade it, they won't do it. I kind of get that. Make it a participation grade. Say if you do it at even a basic level, you get full credit for it rather than it being on some sort of scale or a rubric like we would expect to see with high stakes writing. And if you've never heard of a guy named Peter Elbow, one of the all-time great names out there for an author, this is what he says about low stakes versus high stakes writing. Take a look. Think about it this way, low stakes versus high stakes. You have a decision. I have a decision to make in my life. Do I go down this route and apply for this job? Do I go down this route and apply for this other job? So I sit down and I start journaling it out. Maybe I type it out on a screen or a handwrite. It doesn't really matter. The process of me doing that is not going to be my best writing. It's not going to be this polished thing that I can publish online. It's to help me figure out, okay, this is a pro, this is a con, this is a good thing, this is not a good thing. I hadn't thought of that. The process of writing is the process of thinking. In fact, that's one of the takeaways I wish many of our students would understand. The process of writing is the process of thinking. Here's an example of how that's true. Let's say that you get an email from a colleague. You check your email after this session's over and you get an email from a colleague and there's a negative tone in that email. Maybe it's the word choice, maybe it's they capitalize something, maybe it's the emoticons, whatever. There's sort of a negative undertone of the email. So you say to yourself, okay, I need to respond, but I'm going to respond professionally like a grown-up. I'm not going to give them a whole bunch of negative tone back. This is what you do. You hit the reply button and you start typing away a response. As you're typing the response, you're actually developing the response the same time you're writing the response. Have you ever thought about it that way? So you keep typing away and you get to a word and you think, oh, that's a pretty loaded word. I better not use that. So you right click, go down to synonyms and find a better word. And you keep writing and you write a sentence and you think, oh, that's a better way to start the paragraph rather than end it. So you cut and paste and you put it somewhere else. The process of writing or drafting that email is the process of figuring out what you're going to say to them. It's not that you have a clear, coherent thought in your mind and then you put the words to it. Putting the words to it helps create a clear, coherent thought. And that's what really our students need to understand is the process of writing is not where I have a clear, logical, coherent, accurate thought in my head. Then I pick up the pencil after I have that clear, logical, coherent, accurate thought in my head. I pick up a pen or a pencil, and then I transfer that clear, logical, coherent, accurate thought from my head onto my paper. That's not writing. If you want to create a clear, logical, coherent, accurate thought, start writing. The process of writing is the process of figuring out what you know, what you don't know, what you think, what you understand. That's what gets me so excited, especially working with kids, is when you want to figure out what you know, start writing about it. It'll clarify. The process of writing will clarify the whole process. Okay, it's audience participation time. No need to use the chat feature because there's a lot of different fill in the blanks here. Here's some tips for making writing a little bit more low stakes for your kids. See if you can answer or figure out which words go in each of those blank lines. This should take us about 45 seconds. Give it a shot. Let's see how you did. Number one, provide the rationale. Avoid characterizing low stakes writing as less important than high stakes writing. Always provide the rationale why you're doing the low stakes writing. And don't say this is just low stakes writing. It's not as important as the formal essay we'll write at the end of the unit. Low stakes writing is as important, and I would even make the argument that it's more important than the formal, heavy, seriously graded stuff that we do. Provide a rationale whenever you're doing these low stakes writing strategies, which I'll show you here in a moment, and don't talk about them as less than important. They are as important, if not more. Provide prompts, both orally and visually, and sentence starters. We'll go into that next, sentence starters and prompts and how they work together. Of course, we model the process directly for our kids so they can see the process of this low stakes writing stuff. Before the writing begins, tell the students, this is number 4, how the writing will be used or utilized. So I provide the rationale why we're doing it and how we're going to do it and the ultimate outcome as well. So I might say to the students, I might say something like this. Students, we just spent the last 10 minutes discussing this really important topic. In order to help you wrap your head around all these ideas and figure out what you know about it, we're going to do a 3-minute quick write. When you're done with the 3-minute quick write, you're going to have a conversation with people next to you. Could be as simple as that. Number 5, be clear about the time limits or about how much time you're going to give the students to do the writing task. And number 6, avoid starting a task in the last 10 minutes. Why is that? We've all done this. We've all made this mistake where it's like 7 minutes before the bell rings or before it's time for us to transition. So we say, oh, wait, we got to do our tickets out the door. Quick, get your 3x5 cards. Let's do our ticket out the door. When we do that, they're going to be rushed and probably not give really good, deep, accurate thoughts to it. They're going to just write something down real quick so that they're not late for whatever they have to transition to next. Use the low stakes writing to learn strategies at the bulk, at the meat and the heart of your lesson. And then ultimately, our kids do pretty well when you have them experience something, then write about an experience. Here are just some examples. These are examples from probably slightly older students of low stakes writing prompts that you might ask. Writing in the service of thinking is another way to think about it. Writing in the service of figuring out what you understand and what you don't understand. Writing in the service of just thinking and processing. That's really the focus, rather than writing in the service of communicating to your teacher what you know about a topic. That's important, but we focus way too much on that stuff in school because it's easier to grade. We think we need to prepare kids for college and so on. And I agree, we do have to do those things. But the more we focus on the low stakes writing to learn, the better off our kids are. I mentioned earlier writing prompts and sentence starters and how they go together. This is pretty obvious. Most of you have thought about it this way. The prompt is what you want students to write about, and many students benefit from being given a sentence starter in order to help them get the process of writing started. Here are just some examples of sentence starters. Sentence stems, you've heard of them called sentence stems as well. That the idea is this: the prompt is the question, what I want them to write about. Many kids, when you say, okay, I want you to do a quick write about the concept we just learned, pretty generic prompt. And many kids will say, I don't know what to write about. Sometimes that's an excuse and a cop-out. They'll say, I don't know. Say, why don't you begin writing? Say, I don't know what to say. They say, okay, no, not a problem. I do. Provide them sentence starters. Now, sometimes when I work with teachers, I say, give them like 2 or 3 options of sentence starters they could use. Sentence starters are a way to just jumpstart the conversation. That's all it is. Jumpstart the conversation in their mind. The sentence starters or sentence stems almost always end with the ellipses, the ... at the end. We train kids. That just means you get to finish the sentence. And for young kids, they're pretty simple. They could be, I think, ... I know ... 3 things I know about blank are ... who can be really, really simple. If you want even more sentence starters as examples or sentence stems, just do a quick Google search that you'll see tons and tons and tons of them all over the internet. Don't just ask kids to write. Don't just add the prompt. When you add that sentence starter, it does wonders for kids because it takes away that I don't know what to write about. Say, that's okay, I do. Here's the first sentence of your entry. The first sentence you're going to write is this, and you provide them some sort of sentence starter. Our next take-home message, I think we have 2 or 3 more, and then we'll jump into the strategies for our last half hour. When we provide students lots of writing to learn opportunities, it works really well for content area teachers, even for PE teachers, science teachers, math teachers. You know, here's my bias, and I've preached this to as many people as will listen. Students should be writing in every class every day. I know it can't always happen 1,000% of the time or 100% of the time. There are going to be exceptions, but every class every day, because when I use writing to learn strategies, I actually remember content better. So let's say I'm a high school math teacher and I want my kids to remember information, to process information. I need them to master those mathematical concepts. I don't know of many ways that will help quicker or be better long-term than having students to write. Doing lots of writing in order to develop, figure out, figure out where to go next, where my gaps are. It's not just about expressing, it's about figuring out on my own. Key idea number 8, and it works. Tons and tons of evidence over many, many decades that when we have students write a lot, grades improve, standardized test scores improve, comprehension improves, you name it, it just about works across the board. And here's our final take-home message. Then we're going to jump into the cool strategies. There are really only 3 kinds of writing, not to be confused with the 3 purposes of writing: to remember something, say something, communicate something, etc., or to process something. There's really only 3 kinds of writing. Here are those 3 kinds of writing defined. Take a look. As you can, all 3 are necessary and important, but as you can guess, the more we focus on provisional and readable writing, and even more on provisional writing is the writing that you just do for yourself. Here's an example. You need to go to the grocery store this afternoon, so you pick up a piece of paper and you start making yourself a list. When it comes to writing that's only for your consumption, no one else is going to look at it. The format doesn't really matter. Spelling and punctuation don't really matter. So on that grocery list, if you misspell mayonnaise, who cares? Because at the end of using that writing, because it's just for your own consumption, you probably crumple up that piece of paper and throw it away. It's just to help you process or remember something. Lots and lots of provisional writing for the service of figuring out, remembering, processing, and thinking. I'm the only audience. Provisional writing, if students share their writing with someone else, it then becomes readable writing. So if we have students do some sort of writing task and it's going to be shared with a peer or with you, a ticket out the door is a readable writing task. Spelling, punctuation, grammar, and format matter a whole lot more. They don't matter to the extent that they do when you're polished, because when it's polished, you make sure you don't really want any errors, maybe an occasional typo or a comma out of place, not a big deal. But when you do a polished piece of writing, capitalization, usage, punctuation, spelling, APA format, etc., those all matter a lot. Readable is different than polished, which is different than provisional. Provisional is by me, for me. Readable is by me for some sort of an audience. And polished is by me for some sort of presentation or grade or ultimate outcome. Someone's going to really be assessing and looking critically at my polished piece of writing. You could think the polished piece of writing like that essay you do in the college course you're taking. If you're taking an online master's course right now, all of those essays you have to write, there's probably in the rubric, there's probably something about spelling and grammar and APA format and all those sorts of things. Those things matter a whole lot more than they do in the other forms of writing. And as you've already guessed, the strategies I'm about to share with you really focus on a lot of provisional and a lot of readable. Do we have to do polished writing? Of course we do. It's probably in your curricular maps. But the less we focus on that, and the more we focus on provisional and readable, students actually become better writers as a result, and they're a little less grumbly when it comes to doing the official stuff like the theme from A Christmas Story. Okay, here are our take-home messages. It is audience participation time. We're going to use the chat feature this time around. Of the 9 take-home messages, which one is hitting home with you the most? You can put the sentence in or the statement or just the number. What's processing? Let me give it time to just think for a moment. Of everything I've thrown out at you really quickly, what's hitting home with you? Now, here's the good stuff. We get to spend the rest of our time just talking strategies. I mentioned, I think in the past, I'm a strategies guy. I love a good strategy. And here are some really good provisional and readable writing to learn rather than writing to express learning, rather writing to serve learning strategies. If you're interested, they did end up in one of the books you see there, that they're on the screen. In the next half hour, we don't have a chance probably to talk about all of them, so we'll pick and choose. And this is certainly not an exhaustive list. There's tons and tons and tons of ways to go about doing a lot of provisional and readable strategies. I want to just share a couple of them with you, and heads up, we're going to do a couple of them as well. I want to talk and just explain a couple of them to you. Then I want us to do them together. You are actually going to be writing here in a few minutes. That writing that I'll ask you to do in a few minutes, you can do on a piece of paper with a pen or a pencil, or you can do it on the computer. But I'll prompt you when it's time to do that. Here's a first really good strategy. It's just an example or a variation of a written conversation. Written conversations is a strategy been around a long time. My version of that is add-on. Take a look, read the description, then I'll highlight just a couple of things. So this is an example of a readable strategy, not a provisional. It's readable because I'm sharing it with someone else. The one thing, a couple of things I would change in this description since rather from when I originally wrote it. On point number 3, that most students probably need longer than 30 to 60 seconds in order to write. So maybe 2 to 3 minutes. You know your kids, you know their tolerances. I would also probably add in a sentence starter as an option for kids in order to get the writing started, so they don't say, I don't know what to write about. Give them a sentence starter. So I do some writing. I do essentially a bit of a brain dump. Then I put my papers in the middle, or I trade my papers. I could even hand it to the person to the left or to the right. We can go around in a cycle. Then I read what somebody else has wrote, and then I add additional ideas to it. It's a way to expand the number of ideas that are floating around so that kids can see what other people agree with, what other people disagree with, what they say, what they think. I'm just adding ideas onto someone else's original work. It comes all the way around to me, and it expands our discussion. That's really all it does, is it allows me to expand, just like a personal conversation with words. This is a written conversation on paper. Nice strategy, works really well for a lot of kids. Here is another strategy. It's a variation of an alphabet summary. A couple of different ways you can go about doing this. You can do a full sheet of paper like the one you see there on the left, or you can give kids 3x5 cards or half sheets of paper, and they can come up with random letters. Here's how I've done it many times in the past. Let's say I teach a lesson to my students. And I say, students, I want to give us a chance to just wrap our heads around these ideas and figure out what we know, what we understand, what we don't know, what's next. And so each of you get a 3x5 card. On that 3x5 card down the left-hand side, write 5 random letters. Doesn't matter what the letters are, doesn't need to make a word, just 5 random letters. Q, D, A, X, U. Doesn't matter, just 5 random letters. So they do that. Then I say, okay, now your job is to associate something we just talked about with one of those letters. And so I can do it with a full alphabet summary. I can do it in a more miniature way like that. And what it does is it forces me to think just a little bit differently. In this case, I'm not writing out full sentences necessarily or full paragraphs. I'm just using writing in order to organize ideas and kind of think a little bit outside the box. Now, the full sheet of paper that you see on the left, here's a way that many teachers have used it that I've worked with, is at the beginning of a unit or a beginning of a series of study, they hand out an alphabet summary. And they say, students, I haven't even taught you any of this content yet, but I want to see what you already know. We're going to do a little bit of a pre-test to think what we already know. And so the teacher says, here's the unit we're about to step into. What do you already know? Associate 3 of those letters, any random letter, doesn't matter what order, associate some of those letters with something you already know about this topic. Then they continue to add on that a couple of times a week. A couple of times a week, as they add more knowledge, more information, they go back and they add additional ideas to their alphabet summary, to the point where at some point they try to get all of the letters of the alphabet completed and filled in. One teacher told me, she said, Bryan, I love that strategy. The way I help my kids track what they knew versus what they added was we use different color pens at each phase. The pre-test knowledge is like in red, then midway we do it in blue and black, and at the end we do it in green. So we add different colors in order to track, oh, that's what I used to think versus now what I know now. What's so cool about something like that is, let's say a student made some sort of connection or what they thought they knew, and then throughout the lessons they learned, oh, that's not true at all. Then they get to correct that on there as well. Let's keep going with strategies. One of my all-time favorites, this comes from Spencer Kagan. If you know, Spencer Kagan is one of the cooperative learning gurus out there. And we all have done lots of times in our careers, think, pair, share. Now, here's my personal opinion and experience with think, pair, share, is it usually doesn't work. I'm just speaking from experience. So I present some information to my kids and I say, okay, cool, turn to a partner and share what you know, or I give them a prompt. Usually those discussions, if we're honest, are think, pair, share parts. If kids talk at all, one kid does all the talking, the other kid does all the listening. Or both kids say something, but the conversations are like really short. The reason those don't work as well, the think, pair, share, or the buddy buzz, or turn to a partner and summarize, is because kids are required to process and share only what's floating around in their mind at that given moment. And if you have kids who struggle with working memory issues, which we've talked about in the past, those conversations don't last. Rather, give them an opportunity to first give them a prompt, think about something, have them then pick up a piece of paper or do it in a journal entry to write in order to think about that question. Think about the question, write about the question, then pair off and share what you know. The reason that works so well, and this is as simple a strategy as there are, is I now have something externalized on a piece of paper that I can utilize in order to have that conversation. I've thought about how I could answer it. I've externalized an answer. Then when it comes to talking, I actually have something that I can look at and reference, not just what's floating around in my head. We can do a read, write, pair, share. There's a lot of different, you could do a video, write, pair, share. The key idea is you give them time to process in writing what they think, what they know, what they understand, then have the conversation. And just absolutely amazing things happen for kids. Think, write, pair, share, one of my all-time favorites, and it's super simple. It doesn't really get much more simple than that one. All right, I promised you audience participation that we were going to do a writing strategy together, and now is that time. In order to do this, please get a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil, or open up your Word document if you prefer to do it on a computer. You can do that as well. I'm going to get my phone out so I can get my timer out, because this particular strategy is timed. So let me tell you what we're going to do, and then I'll prompt you to get started. This is going to be a variation of what we call fast writing. Now, Bobby DePorter and her colleagues wrote Quantum Learning. They did not develop the concept of fast writing. It's been around a lot longer than that. I just love the way they define it. It's a really good book. That particular book is pretty old, been around a while, but it's really good. So I'm going to give you the prompt here in just a moment. That's the subject. The subject is going to be writing to learn. I'm going to give you 3 minutes. During those 3 minutes, I'm actually going to turn my camera off so you don't have to worry about any visual distraction there. Your job is to just continuously write for 3 minutes. That's why I got my phone out, so I can time you. Your job is to nonstop write for 3 minutes. If you get stuck and you say, I don't know what to write next, literally what you will write is, I can't think of what to write, or I'm stuck and I don't know what to write. If you need to write that 5 or 6 times, just keep writing the same sentence over and over and over again. The idea is the pen doesn't stop, the fingers don't stop moving. For 3 minutes, they just keep going. When you're being timed, don't worry about any of the capitalization, usage, structure, format. Don't worry about editing or crossing something out or misspelling. None of that stuff matters. Because this is provisional writing, you're not going to share it with anyone. It's only for your own consumption in order to figure out what you know, what you understand, and so forth. All right, here's your prompt, and then I'll say ready, set, go in a minute. Here's your prompt. Of everything I've shared with you so far, what's hitting home the most? What are ideas you want to share with your students or with your colleagues? Of everything I've shared with you since the start of our session, what's floating around in your mind? What are you going to do about it? What's your next steps? Where are you going with all this information? All right, 3 minutes, ready, set, go. So let's talk about fast writing as a strategy. You got to know your kids, whether or not they might be freaked out or not freaked out about this. When you do something like fast writing, it's provisional, meaning they're not going to be turning it in. No points attached. It's low stakes when it comes to that, but it is a little bit high stress. Why is it a little high stress? Because I put a timer on it. And I told you, don't stop writing, keep going, keep going, keep going. You have to know your kids. If you have kids who will be freaked out and melt down because the timer's too much stress, then you don't do this strategy. But when you set it up and say, we're going to use the timer and that's okay, this is going to keep us on track, and they know that it's not for a grade, it does tend to lower the stress just a little bit. I wanted us to experience it because when there's just a tad little bit of pressure or stress because of the timer, it tends us to kind of keep focus and keep going. And 3 minutes is not a terribly long period of time anyway. The more we use these kind of strategies to just process and think and develop, the more they stick with us, and we become better technical writers the more we write. But we tell kids this all the time, right? How do you become a better reader? You read a lot. How do you become a better writer? You write a lot. And you don't just write that formal stuff. All right, I'm going to skip over one and I'm going to jump to this one. Focal points is one of my all-time favorite strategies. We're going to talk about one variation of it, but what's a focal point? A focal point is literally what you have your students put their eyeballs on during an academic task, a conversation, a written task. It doesn't matter what it is. Where do I focus my eyes during a task? That focal points can be things like a page in a book, or a handout, or a worksheet, or an image, or even a 3x5 card or a note that they had previously written. Students tend to do pretty well when they're processing, when you tell them, look at this. Sometimes for little kids especially, we have to be like super overt. We're going to talk about one variation of focal points, and that's the use of powerful images. Powerful images, let me define it for you first, then I'll show you all sorts of really cool examples. A powerful image is one that makes you want to talk about it or think about it. Look at the screen. If you're not looking at the screen right now, look up for just a moment. A powerful image is one that makes kids go from one of these to, huh. It makes them kind of mentally sit up and pay attention just a little bit more. A powerful image evokes something, some sort of an emotional response. Sometimes the emotional response is, huh, I didn't know that. Sometimes the emotional response is, no way. Sometimes the emotional response is laughter. A powerful image is something that they look at, a focal point that gets them to go from one of these to, whoa. Let me show you some examples. Take a look. So I hope Google didn't lie to me, and I hope these are actually about the right, right sizes to each other. So first I show this to kids, I have to let them know the Earth is not that close to the sun. We're just talking relative size here, aren't we? I don't know about you. I don't explain it to kids this way, but when I first saw this, I tend to sometimes think of myself as a big deal. Truth is, I'm not. When you look at like the cosmic scheme of things, I'm not even a dot on the planet Earth. And when you look at the Earth compared to the sun, that's one that's like, I knew the sun was big, but wow, I never really realized it was like, wow. So the emotional response, the powerful image would be like, whoa, never thought about that way. That's pretty big. I mean, we know the sun is big, but that's what a powerful image does. How does this relate to writing? Is I give a kid something to look at that's interesting, then I have the writing attached to that interesting thing we get to look at. So the provisional writing strategy might be attached to something like this. Here's another example. Actually, this one isn't quite as interesting, but if I'm teaching them talking about things that are hidden, we know that, what is it? Something about 2/3 of a iceberg is underneath the surface of the water. I give them something interesting to look at. Here's another example. This might take you a moment to lean in and figure out why it's so good, but I love this particular image. So let me tell you what you're looking at if you haven't already figured it out. You're looking at the floor of a bathroom that's been painted. It's a regular solid surface floor of a bathroom that somebody actually painted, who was like really talented. And it's kind of humorous and kind of funny because it's like you're looking down from a glass bottom plane. You see somebody falling through the sky. This is one that's like, oh, okay. So sometimes the powerful image evokes like, oh, Oh, that's weird. But it alerts me just a little bit. And then I attach academic tasks to some sort of interesting thing we get to look at. Sometimes the academic task is talking. Sometimes it's writing. It's just processing. Powerful images do that. Here's another example. They don't always have to be serious. It's how we're all feeling during the entire school year. The entire 2021 school year is this is our feeling, right? Sometimes we feel like we're just barely hanging on. Here's one of my favorites. This is actually a real picture of a base jumper. Base jumpers are ones that have parachutes on their back. They jump off of things, structures, rather than out of a plane. This is the Devil's Hole in Mexico. It's actually a giant pit people jump down into. So when I first saw this, I thought, okay, good for him or her, whoever that is. I ain't doing that. Some of you would say, no thanks. Some of you would say, yeah, let's give it a shot. That sounds like fun. The point is a powerful image just evokes something. It brings you from going from this to, really, people do that? Then we attach the academic task to that increased alertness that was brought on by some sort of powerful image. I think I did share this one with you in one of our previous sessions. Did I share this one with you? Did it look familiar? One of my favorite pictures. So powerful images don't always have to be serious. Sometimes they can be funny. They can be funny like that one as well. Parents, what are you going to do? Not much you can do sometimes. And lastly, one of my all-time favorite pictures is this one. I saw one of you on the camera do one of these, like, nope, one of my happy places is my mountain bike. I'm pretty good on a mountain bike. I ride a lot, but I would never in a million years think about doing that. That's a real, there's actually a video on YouTube of the guys. There's 3 of them doing this. It's a place in Ireland, Scotland, one of the Isles in the British Kingdom. It's a hiking trail. People actually hike that trail. I don't even think I'd try to hike it, much less ride it on my mountain bike. Actually, this is, you all probably know this place already. If you've ever seen the movie The Princess Bride, there's some place called the Cliffs of Insanity, where the giant's climbing up the cliffs with everyone on his back. That's this place. It was the Cliffs of Insanity were modeled after this place. The Cliffs of Moher, I think, is what they're called. Anyway, powerful image just makes you go, huh? And then I attach some sort of academic task to it, and wonderful, wonderful things happen. All right, I'm going to skip ahead and share with you just one more idea. Then we'll do a short Q&A if you're interested. And that is, what about summaries? What about summaries? Summaries are not a bad thing, right? Marzano did lots of work on summaries and the power of summaries. Summaries are not a bad thing. So we don't want to stop asking our kids to summarize, but think about it this way if you've never thought about it. If you have a student in your class who's pretty astute, has a pretty good working memory, pretty spot on, they can summarize the heck out of stuff and not know the slightest clue of what they're summarizing. Some students have learned when I summarize, I'm supposed to use some of these big fancy words and parrot back some of the things the teacher said. I can summarize things and not have the slightest clue what I'm talking about. If you think about it this way, the 15 or so of us, we could all go to like a graduate level physics class, assuming that you're not already really good at graduate level physics. I'd be lost there. I could sit in a graduate level physics class for an hour, and at the end of the hour, I could actually summarize some of the concepts, but I'd be clueless as to what the heck I was summarizing. You can summarize without truly understanding. Summaries are the beginning, not the end. So continue to have your kids summarize, but then use those summaries for some sort of specific task. That's the key takeaway with that.